The intricate architecture of global celebrity, modern media dynamics, and institutional power frequently converges on the concept of personal safety, creating an invisible grid where status and survival are inextricably linked. For those who occupy the upper echelons of public visibility, protection is rarely a simple logistical matter managed quietly behind closed doors. Instead, it transforms into a highly public currency that signals legitimacy, official endorsement, and an individual's precise standing within a rigid hierarchy. When a high-profile figure transitions from an institutional role to an independent existence on the global stage, the mechanics of their daily security become a complex battleground where personal anxieties encounter the unyielding boundaries of state bureaucracy. This friction generates a unique kind of public fascination, wherein every vehicular detail, advanced travel notice, and protective detail is scrutinized not merely for its practical efficiency, but for what it reveals about power, control, and the shifting tides of institutional favor. In an era dominated by instantaneous digital communication and rapid news cycles, these security arrangements are frequently thrust into the media spotlight, becoming the foundation for grand narratives of exclusion, defiance, and strategic PR maneuvering. The public is left to decipher a continuous stream of official statements, media briefings, and legal filing disclosures, all while trying to separate the genuine physical risks inherent to global prominence from the symbolic weight of state-sponsored protection to understand the current tension surrounding high-profile security on British soil. One must look closely at the underlying structures that govern these high-stakes decisions, moving past the sensationalized media reports to examine the precise institutional mechanics at play. Navigating this complex landscape requires a deep appreciation for the subtle shifts in institutional dynamics and the long-term strategies employed by media commentators to unpack these developments for a global audience. If you find these deep analytical breakdowns valuable and wish to stay informed on the inner workings of global high-profile networks, please consider subscribing to the channel to ensure you never miss an update as this multi-layered story continues to unfold. The evolving discourse around modern protective measures highlights a broader cultural fascination with the vulnerabilities of the highly visible, transforming a technical administrative process into a dramatic narrative of personal sovereignty versus institutional discipline. Within this narrative, every public appearance becomes a calculated risk, and every administrative ruling becomes a direct reflection of an individual's proximity to traditional centers of authority. The ongoing debate does not merely center on physical safety, it serves as a profound exploration of how modern institutions define duty, residency, and the precise boundaries of public service in an increasingly volatile global environment. The historical trajectory of this specific security dispute reveals a timeline marked by sudden structural changes, intense legal challenges, and a continuous stream of conflicting public statements that have kept media analysts engaged for years. The initial shift occurred in the early months of 2020, when a prominent public couple announced their intention to step back from their established institutional roles, aiming to forge a financially independent path while maintaining a commitment to global public service. At the core of this transition was an assumption regarding their ongoing status as internationally protected persons, a designation that traditionally guarantees seamless state-funded security regardless of geographic location or active working status. However, the administrative bodies responsible for evaluating these high-stakes arrangements quickly established a different interpretation, concluding that a permanent relocation abroad and a cessation of official duties fundamentally altered the individual's eligibility for automatic protection. This administrative pivot marked the beginning of a prolonged multi-year conflict, characterized by extensive judicial reviews, massive financial expenditures on legal representation, and a growing sense of personal grievance that has been consistently communicated through various media channels. The technicality of the dispute rests on whether protective coverage should be granted automatically based on historical status and global risk, or whether it must be administered through a flexible, case-by-case framework tailored to specific itineraries and advanced notification protocols. As the summer months approach and highly anticipated international events draw near, the focus has shifted toward upcoming visits to the United Kingdom and the precise nature of the protective measures that will be deployed on the ground. Recent media reports have suggested a potential escalation in the intensity of the security detail assigned to these specific itineraries, prompting widespread speculation among commentators regarding a possible shift in official policy or a quiet reconciliation behind the scenes. Analysts are carefully parsing these developments, noting that while the fundamental administrative criteria remain unchanged, the practical application of the existing framework may be adjusted to mitigate potential public relations complications during high-profile public appearances. The memory of past incidents where unauthorized individuals managed to breach peripheral boundaries and gain proximity to public figures continues to influence the strategic planning of both independent security teams and state-backed coordination units. These past encounters are often utilized by various factions to validate their respective arguments, with one side pointing to the breaches as evidence of an unworkable system, and the other citing the successful containment of the threat as proof that the current bespoke arrangement is entirely functional. The resulting discourse creates a dense atmosphere of anticipation, setting the stage for a critical evaluation of how status, safety, and institutional control will manifest during upcoming public engagements on British soil. The core of this escalating tension resides within the secretive mechanics of the Royal and VIP Executive Committee, a highly specialized and traditionally low-profile administrative body operating within the framework of the British Home Office. For decades, this committee has quietly dictated the precise parameters of state-funded protection for prominent individuals, functioning far from the public gaze according to rigid institutional criteria rather than personal prominence or global media visibility. The foundational rule governing their decisions is deceptively simple yet unyielding. Mandatory, automatic 24-hour armed protection is strictly reserved for working members of the royal family who maintain permanent residency within the United Kingdom. When an individual voluntarily relinquishes these official duties and establishes a permanent residence 5,500 miles away, they procedurally exit this specific cohort regardless of their historical lineage, birthright, or the global threats generated by their public profile. The committee has consistently maintained through years of intense court proceedings that its role is not to assess whether an individual faces general risk, but rather to determine if they meet the strict procedural definitions required for automatic state-sponsored coverage. This distinction has become the primary source of friction, transforming a technical administrative guideline into a highly emotional public debate about institutional fairness, rejection, and the true cost of independence from the traditional structures of the state. Following the initial structural break in early 2020, the administrative body devised what appeared to be a highly flexible and accommodating solution, establishing a bespoke, case-by-case framework for the individual's return visits to British soil. Under this specific protocol, the visitor is required to provide a mandatory 28 days notice, submitting a detailed itinerary of their planned movements, public engagements, and accommodation arrangements to the Home Office. Upon receiving this detailed information, specialized police divisions, such as the Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit, evaluate the specific threat environment surrounding each event and deploy appropriate protective measures tailored to those exact facts. On paper, this arrangement represents a significant level of state cooperation, offering access to specialized intelligence gathering and active police coordination that ordinary citizens could never dream of accessing. For instance, during previous summer visits, local police forces have actively intervened to secure transportation routes, blocking out entire train carriages and managing terminal security to ensure a seamless transit through public spaces. Yet, this flexible compromise has been consistently portrayed through media briefings as an insulting and unworkable restriction, a bureaucratic stitch-up designed to punish those who chose to leave the official fold, rather than a practical mechanism designed to balance public safety with taxpayer accountability. The conflict reached a boiling point when legal representatives initiated a series of high-stakes lawsuits against the Home Office, seeking a formal judicial review of these administrative decisions in a desperate bid to overturn the bespoke framework. The legal strategy attempted to establish a precedent whereby an individual could personally fund their own state-provided armed police protection, essentially arguing that the Metropolitan Police should be available for hire to mitigate specific high-profile risks. This line of reasoning encountered immediate and firm resistance from government attorneys, who argued that elite armed state forces are a finite public resource dedicated to public service, not a private security firm available to wealthy individuals who choose to live overseas. The prolonged legal battle dragged through the courts for years, accumulating an astronomical financial burden estimated to exceed well over £1 million in taxpayer and personal legal fees. In early 2024, the High Court delivered a decisive ruling, declaring that the committee's decision-making process was entirely lawful, rational, and procedurally fair, explicitly validating the 28-day notice requirement as a sensible administrative measure. Undeterred by this comprehensive judicial defeat, the individual pushed the case forward to the Court of Appeal, further deepening the institutional divide and generating an atmosphere of intense paranoia. Characterized by highly emotional media interviews that openly questioned the motives of senior palace officials, the public narrative surrounding this security struggle has been further complicated by a series of high-profile international excursions, which critics often cite to challenge the validity of the ongoing safety complaints. Over the past year, the global public has witnessed extensive travel through regions with highly complex security environments, including major South American nations, West African countries, and high-visibility appearances at European fashion capitals. These international tours are frequently conducted without the specific state-sponsored protections demanded within the United Kingdom, relying instead on private security details and local state infrastructure to manage crowd control and personal safety. Observers have noted the deep irony inherent in a situation where an individual willingly navigates crowded public spaces in nations with relaxed firearm regulations or histories of civil unrest, while simultaneously declaring the rural landscapes of Windsor and Surrey to be far too dangerous for a family visit. This contrast has led to accusations of a calculated public relations campaign, with suggestions that the security issue is being utilized as a convenient barrier to avoid returning to the United Kingdom on institutional terms. The constant assertion that the physical safety of children prevents them from meeting their paternal grandfather has introduced an element of emotional pressure into the dispute, a tactic that has been received with considerable icy detachment by the residents of Buckingham Palace. The tension has been significantly heightened by the specific actions and public disclosures of the individual involved. most notably the highly controversial publication of personal memoirs that detailed specific military operations and casualty counts from historical overseas conflicts. The decision to publicly announce the exact number of opposition fighters neutralized during military service was widely condemned by security experts as an astonishingly short-sighted move that dramatically elevated the personal threat level, effectively painting a target on the individual's back for global extremist networks. This self-inflicted vulnerability was later confirmed during appellate court hearings, where it was revealed that international terrorist organizations had actively issued directives calling for retaliation based on those specific literary disclosures. Critics have argued that it defies all logic to deliberately provoke international security threats for commercial gain while simultaneously demanding that the British taxpayer foot the bill for 24-hour armed protection to mitigate those very risks. This sequence of events has fueled speculation that the entire security narrative may be intentionally sustained to provoke a crisis, forcing a scenario where the state is compelled to grant automatic protection, thereby restoring the official status and royal validation that was voluntarily abandoned years prior, as the highly anticipated July visit to Birmingham for the anniversary of a major international sporting initiative approaches. The media apparatus has begun channeling specific updates regarding the logistical realities of the upcoming trip. Recent reports published in major daily publications indicate that a subtle compromise may be taking shape, suggesting that, while the foundational legal cohort rules remain completely unyielding, the upcoming itinerary will receive a significantly beefed-up version of the existing bespoke arrangement. This temporary escalation in protective measures is designed to counter specific, localized threats and prevent any potential public disruptions that could embarrass the host nation or dominate global headlines. However, this adjustment is a far cry from the total victory and automatic restoration of status that had been confidently predicted by public relations teams at the start of the year. The reality remains that the upcoming visit will likely be a solitary endeavor, as the strict adherence to the bespoke protocol means that the broader family will remain overseas, unwilling to lose face by returning under any system that does not offer full institutional capitulation. The gridlock remains absolute, and the upcoming public appearances will serve as a stark demonstration of how the unyielding rules of state administration continue to resist the intense pressure of modern celebrity grievance. The broader implications of this ongoing security dispute extend far beyond the immediate logistics of personal protection, reaching into the very heart of the long-term institutional strategy for the modern British monarchy. Within the quiet corridors of palace planning, the ultimate objective has become the systematic separation of safety from status, ensuring that an individual's physical security can be guaranteed without inadvertently restoring the official validation and royal authority they voluntarily walked away from. This delicate balancing act has taken on an entirely new dimension as the sovereign navigates his ongoing health challenges with a surprising degree of resilience and determination, effectively reasserting his personal control over the family's public narrative. Rather than allowing the institution to be dominated by the preferences of the next generation in line for the throne, the monarch has demonstrated a willingness to utilize a combination of strategic discipline and subtle personal outreach to manage the ongoing friction. This approach is exemplified by a deliberate willingness to support specific, highly respected charitable endeavors, such as the upcoming international sporting games slated for Birmingham, while firmly refusing to alter the established administrative rules that govern state-sponsored protective details. This subtle institutional strategy represents a marked contrast to the more rigid approach favored by the direct heir to the throne. who has consistently advocated for a complete and permanent severance of all official ties, drawing historical parallels to past 20th century abdications. The prevailing theory within that faction suggests that a clean break is the only way to protect the integrity of the monarchy, preventing independent figures from operating as rogue quasi-royal actors who command massive public attention without submitting to the traditional discipline imposed on the rest of the working family. The nightmare scenario for institutional planners is not a physical threat, but rather the constant potential for public disruptions, where unsanctioned appearances or highly synchronized media statements systematically overshadow major state occasions and charitable events. By maintaining a firm grip on the allocation of official security resources, the institutions successfully prevents these independent operations from gaining the symbolic authority that comes with state-backed protection. This ensures that any high-profile return to British soil must occur strictly on the institution's terms, effectively neutralizing the capacity of independent public relations teams to dictate the narrative or stage-manage competing public events. The personal biographies of the individuals caught in this bureaucratic gridlock further illustrate the deep-seated complexities of the struggle, as their primary professional operations, charitable foundations, and legacy initiatives remain deeply rooted on British soil. Despite establishing a new life across the Atlantic, the individual's most successful and globally respected venture, the International Tournament for Wounded and Veteran Military Personnel, is structurally and historically bound to the United Kingdom, leaving very few viable platforms for official growth within the highly competitive American entertainment market. With major commercial media partnerships expiring or failing to materialize into long-term stability, the urge to spend more time in the United Kingdom and establish a semi-permanent seasonal residence has intensified. However, this desire is consistently blocked by the rigid architectural framework of the security grievance that has been built up over the past 6 years. Having publicly declared for so long that returning to the home country is fundamentally unsafe without full automatic state intervention, any sudden return with the entire family under the existing bespoke arrangement would result in a massive loss of public credibility, exposing the previous warnings as mere hyperbole. As the critical date in July approaches for the high-visibility engagements in Birmingham, the true casualties of this prolonged institutional warfare are increasingly seen as the youngest members of the lineage, who remain entirely isolated from their paternal heritage and extended family network. Growing up thousands of miles away from the traditional centers of royal life, these young children have had no opportunity to form genuine, face-to-face relationships with their grandfather or their cousins, existing instead as abstract figures within a complex web of international legal filings and media briefings. The ongoing refusal to navigate the United Kingdom under the state's tailored security parameters means that an entire generation is being systematically disconnected from its historical roots, all while the adult participants remain locked in a battle of wills over procedural precedents and emotional leverage. The widespread public perception that these children are being utilized as bargaining chips to force a capitulation from the palace has only hardened the resolve of institutional traditionalists, who view such tactics as a form of emotional pressure that must be resisted at all costs to preserve the dignity of the crown. The historical context of this conflict highlights a recurring pattern within the long story of the global elite, where the intense desire for personal freedom and commercial independence frequently clashes with the rigid, unyielding requirements of traditional state structures. The fundamental error made throughout this 6-year campaign has been the decision to take private administrative grievances entirely public, transforming a sensitive matter of personal logistics into an aggressive media crusade that left no room for quiet behind-the-scenes negotiation. In the sensitive world of high-level security management, public exposure is universally viewed as a severe destabilizing factor, yet the continuous stream of explosive interviews, documentary features, and literary broadsides has effectively forced the state's hands, making any official concession appear like a weak capitulation to celebrity pressure. Had these sensitive matters been handled with the traditional discretion that typically governs the lives of prominent international figures, a comfortable and permanent compromise regarding personal safety would likely have been established years ago without any public loss of face. Ultimately, the upcoming events of the summer will serve as the final, definitive test of this prolonged structural standoff, providing a clear visual answer to the questions that have fueled global media speculation for years. If the highly anticipated arrival in Birmingham occurs as a solitary transit without the presence of the broader family, it will signal an absolute victory for the unyielding machinery of the state and the strategic discipline of the palace, proving that the established cohort rules remain completely non-negotiable. The flexible, beefed-up version of the bespoke arrangement will quietly do its practical work on the ground, ensuring absolute physical safety while offering zero concessions to personal status or institutional rehabilitation. As the digital cameras capture the moments and the global audience passes every detail, the grand narrative of grievance will face its ultimate confrontation with administrative reality, leaving the public to finally witness the true boundaries of modern celebrity influence when measured against the permanent, silent authority